All right, let's jump right in. We're going to unpack a poem that does something you'd never expect. When faced with a heartbreaking death, its first, most jarring move is to, well, refuse to grieve. It's a poem that basically argues that mourning itself can be a kind of crime. It's a pretty wild idea, right? I mean, how could the act of remembering, of grieving someone, possibly be wrong? Well, that is the exact unsettling question the Welsh poet Dylan Thomas wants us to wrestle with. And the answer? It's as profound as it is uncomfortable. And look at this title. It's a manifesto right from the get-go. He's not being subtle here, is he? It is a flat-out declaration. There's no poetic mystery, just this stark, deliberate refusal. This tells you immediately, okay, we are not in for a typical poem about loss. Now, to get why he would do this, you have to understand the world he was writing in. Thomas wrote this in 1945, right as World War II was ending, and the backdrop, the London Blitz, a period of just unimaginable civilian death. So this isn't some abstract thought experiment, it's a gut reaction to a very real, very brutal kind of tragedy. Okay, so normally when a poet writes about death, they write something called an elegy. And an elegy has a very clear job description, right? It's there to help us grieve, to remember the person, and to offer some kind of comfort. It's a familiar, almost comforting structure for dealing with the unthinkable. But Thomas, he takes that entire tradition and just throws it out the window. I mean, look at this contrast. Where a traditional elegy is all about expressing grief, Thomas refuses. Where it offers us consolation, he rejects it. He doesn't just write a different kind of sad poem, he writes an anti-elegy. He's actively fighting the very purpose of the form. And you have to ask, why? And that brings us to the poem's most shocking, most difficult argument. Thomas genuinely believed that to use poetic language to write a beautiful poem to mourn this child's death would actually be a second, unforgivable act of violence against her. This right here is the key. And look at that word he chooses, murder. He doesn't say he won't misrepresent her death or get it wrong. He says he won't murder her humanity by trying to wrap it up in some neat, tidy, grave truth. To him, language can literally be a weapon. So how does this symbolic murder actually work? Well, think of it like this. First, you have this unspeakable loss. Then, our human instinct kicks in, and language tries to make sense of it, to turn it into a lesson or a symbol of innocence lost. But in doing that, you strip the actual person of their unique humanity. And for Thomas, that reduction, that simplification, is a second act of violence. He felt that falling back on the usual poetic cliches, calling it an elegy of innocence and youth, no matter how good your intentions are, was a deep disrespect to the raw, brutal reality of what happened. It's just too easy, too clean, too poetic for a death that was none of those things. And he goes even further than calling it disrespectful. He calls it blasphemy. He sees the process of life itself, the stations of the breath, as something sacred. And to describe that sacred process with hollow, prepackaged phrases, well, that's like profaning something holy. So, weirdly, his refusal to mourn is actually his way of showing the deepest reverence. So, if the poem's whole message is about holding back, about restraint, then why is it so famously hard to read? Well, it turns out the confusing structure isn't just a stylistic choice. It's the entire point. Just look at this block of text from the poem. There's almost no punctuation. Sentences just crash into each other. It's dense, it's disorienting, and you're forced to slow way, way down. You have to struggle with it. And that struggle is exactly what Thomas wants you to feel. This is one of those cool moments where the form is the meaning. The tangled syntax, that mirrors the poet's own hesitation to even speak about this. The lack of punctuation, that denies us any easy, neat emotional closure. The sheer difficulty of the language is a performance of his moral restraint. He's making us work for the meaning because he believes, in this case, it shouldn't come easy. And we can understand this even better with a big idea called post-structuralism. Now, in a nutshell, it's the idea that language doesn't just describe reality, it actively creates it. And it's super skeptical of anyone claiming to have the one single truth, because that's usually a way of taking control. So, the poem's confusing grammar is a post-structuralist act. By refusing to give us a clear, easy-to-digest story about the child's death,
Thomas is resisting that urge to control her narrative, to slap his truth onto her loss. The difficult form itself is an act of setting her memory free.
Okay, so if Thomas is tearing down the traditional ways of mourning, what does he offer in its place? The answer is hiding in the poem's powerful and pretty mysterious final lines. This is the poem's most famous line, hands down. And on the surface, it just sounds wrong, right? I mean, of course there are other deaths. But Thomas is getting at something much, much deeper than just individual people dying. What he really means is this. Once a person dies, their unique, separate identity dissolves. They don't just stop being, they become part of a huge, universal cycle. The child is no longer a single, isolated victim of a war. She's now part of everything, a timeless, cosmic process that's way bigger than any one person.
And he uses this incredible, almost religious imagery to make his point. He says the child enters the round Zion of the water bead and the synagogue of the ear of corn. He's replacing a human elegy with a cosmic one. Her memorial isn't a poem, it's the entire natural world. So you end up with two completely different ways of responding to tragedy. On one side, you have the traditional elegy. It values language, explanation, and comfort. And on the other, you have Thomas's radical anti-elegy, which says the real value lies in silence, restraint, and connecting the lost to the vastness of nature. And this is the most crucial takeaway. Thomas isn't being heartless. This isn't a poem about not feeling grief. It's a poem about refusing to express that grief with cheap, easy, hollow words that don't do it justice. And this is his final answer. In the face of a tragedy so absolute, so profound that any words you use would just diminish it, silence becomes the only honest ethical response. It's a kind of moral integrity. And after all the complex philosophy and all the difficult language, it all comes back to this: one child. This whole dense, incredible poem is a testament to the immense moral weight of a single human life, and a profound struggle to honor it without destroying it a second time with words. Which really leaves us with a final, powerful question to think about. In those moments of just absolute loss, when any words we can think of feel not just inadequate, but maybe even insulting, is silence the most honest and perhaps the most loving tribute we can possibly offer?